The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Lighting Controls Podcast. Fantastic to have you guys back with us again. We have another great guest, but before we jump into today's conversation, let me just take a minute to remind everyone that today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. We've got all of our episodes, a news feed for the industry, as well as a merch store if you want to support the podcast. But until then, today we've got a special guest, Mark Olerud. Mark, do you mind just giving us a quick breakdown on who you are and what you do?
Sure. Like I said, my name is Mark Olerud. I'm the Vice President of Sales for Lighting Controls for Core Controls. We are the Southern California representative for Crestron Lighting Controls. I have been working as a rep for the last 15 years, previously for an agency out in Connecticut, and working all through the Northeast. And now I'm working on the West Coast down in LA, and have been here just about a year and a half now.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate you coming on today. And I think this is sort of one of those things that Ron and I keep running around, which is, where lighting controls belongs in the scope with design work and everything. And with rep agencies, especially a rep agency like Core Controls, I mean, obviously there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of business to be had with that work. So,
Yep.
Just out of curiosity, from your perspective, who is the lighting controls designer in a commercial project right now?
Well, it's interesting because, like I said, I've been working both on the East Coast and West Coast, and what I'm finding on the West Coast since I've been out here is that I tend to work with lighting designers that could be from a lighting design firm. It could be a lighting designer that's working for an engineering firm. Perhaps an architectural firm has a lighting design department. It might even be a lighting electrical contractor or a distributor if I'm doing design build work with them. They may have their own designers on staff, and we work directly with them. So we'll work with designers across the gambit, working with them to help them come up with solutions for controlling the designs that they come up with.
So I mean, you're kind of a support role for all of these different groups. You're not, from what you're saying, it doesn't sound like you would classify yourself as a lighting controls designer.
So we actually do design systems. So as an agent, we kind of look at ourselves as a little differently than some agents in that we really pride ourselves on the service side of it. I'll work with, or our team will work with designers and provide them with riser diagrams, make recommendations. Especially out in California where we have to deal with Title 24 and the requirements that requires, for a difference in lighting control design as opposed to what some of the things we had to do on the East Coast. So we will provide a full service of laying out the design, providing them with riser diagrams, providing them with the sequence of operation, and then we follow that all the way through the bid process. And right up, we have our own field techs that so we'll help with the startup. One of the things that we like to do is meet with the contractors for pre-con visits. And we like to get with the design team early on, especially on the design side, to sit down with the owner if they'll let us and find out how they really want their system to work. That's one of the areas that I find difficult sometimes, or one of the roads that I find difficult to map out, is how do we get to the end user to have the conversation with them to find out what they're really looking for. Because quite often these projects get designed, and I've, especially for instance, I've done theatrical designs for elementary schools or middle schools or high schools. And if you don't find out how the space is being used, you don't know how you're supposed to be designing to. So
Mm-hmm.
if they're just presenting their Christmas music program once a year and maybe a spring program, you may not need a $500,000 lighting control system for a theater that could do Broadway shows and things like that. Whereas if you've got a department that regularly puts on shows and has several different uses, you want to make sure that you've got the flexibility in the system for whatever might come up on that in that space.
Right. And, that's a sentiment that a lot of people have shared with us, which is it's hard to get to the end user. It's hard to have that conversation with the owner. And I was curious if you had any thoughts on why that is.
From some of my previous experience, it seems like one of the first things is people are afraid to go to the owner and ask the question. They, and from my standpoint, especially if I'm working with an engineering firm, working on the controls design, they may be hired by the architect to provide those services. And so they've got to go to the architect. They're afraid to ask the architect. It seems that there can be sometimes it's a path that nobody wants to go down because they're afraid of what they're going to get into. And sometimes it might be that you're questioning their design ideas, when in reality, all I'm really trying to do is help them find the proper solution for the project and for the end user. And that's quite often the what I find is the biggest challenge is just getting everybody to finally find that path through all of the different channels to get to the end user and the right people at the school. For instance, we did a project here in Connecticut at one of the major universities, and we sat down to talk about sequence of operations for classroom buildings that we were doing. And we spent 3 hours and had the GC, the electrical contractor, the architect, the lighting designer, the engineer, somebody from facilities from the university, and someone else from another member from the university. We talked for 3 hours, came up with about 17 different scenes for each of the classrooms, and then we got down to it, and they brought in the people that are in charge of AV, and the AV people said, no, we get 100%, 75%, 50% and off on all of our in all of our classrooms because teachers are moving from campus to campus and they want the touch screen and the controls to look the same in every classroom in every building across the entire state campus system. So after spending 3.5 hours going through all of these situations, we found out that we had the wrong person in the room. And if they had told us that from the beginning, we would have saved everybody's time, just multitudes of time. So it really comes down to making sure you get the right person in the room.
And I think that is a really good point that is something that maybe people don't take into consideration is that you may have the wrong person in the room with you. I mean, from the theatrical side of things, it's pretty easy to know if the person you're talking to doesn't really know anything about the auditorium that you're designing, because you're going to start spitting out terms that they're going to be like, I don't understand what you're talking about. But when you're talking just commercial building spaces, I mean, it's harder to figure that out. So, do you have any suggestions for trying to clue into if you're talking to the right person or not?
Well, commercial buildings have their own challenges because much of the sequence of operations is determined by code. You have to have daylight harvesting. You have to have motion sensing. You have to have all of these things that the end user absolutely hates, because if it's not set up correctly, it doesn't work, and it becomes more of an issue for the end user, and so they're the ones that start complaining about it. So I find that much of that type of control sequence of operations is determined by code, and then it becomes more a challenge of explaining to the end user, we have to do this because of this, and we want to work with you to minimize the impact that we're having on you and your employees. The last thing we want the lighting to start changing and bothering the end user. and causing disruption in the workplace and things like that, which happens all the time. I've gone into many buildings that you look and an entire half of the room is dark because it's daylight harvesting, and
Yep.
it's likely because the system hasn't been set up correctly.
Hmm.
So it does get to be a challenge there, and it gets to be a challenge getting to the owner quite often during the design process, because they are assuming that the architect or their whoever that they've hired to build their building is handling all of this, and they haven't thought about how the space is supposed to work. They just say, well, we want the lights on during the day.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
what color temperature do you want them? Does it matter what color temperature there are? All of those kinds of things.
Yeah, and there can be so much more to it, right? Like it may not even be like, especially with daylight harvesting, it may not even be that it's set up incorrectly. It may be that no one was ever provided an office layout, and now you've got these cubicles arranged, and you've got this
Right.
divider wall that's blocking all the sunlight and the ambient light from coming in. And if no one has that conversation with the owner that, hey, you're going to need adequate task lighting at every single desk because of this, because those
Right.
lights are going to go off, then yeah, the users are going to have a bad experience. They complain to their managers, and it just snowballs.
Yeah.
And that's part of what,
We
again, right, like you were saying, getting in front of the right people, having those
right.
conversations.
And we actually had that happen on a project that we did it. We set up a mock-up. It's for a major university new science building that they're putting up, and at that time, and it's still very important, but they're very interested in color tuning and circadian rhythm and adjusting the color temperature of the fixtures based on time of day and things like that. So we set up mock-ups in one of the professor's offices and in a grad student office, and set it up so that it followed. In the morning it was the warmer temperature, and as the time of day went on, we get up to a 4,000 or 5,000 Kelvin temperature in the room, and then as the evening sets in, we warmed up the color temperature of the fixtures again. Within 2 weeks, we got complaints from the grad students. How do we turn this off? When you think about it, a grad student is going into their office to work, and it's usually late at night. And the last thing they want the lights to do is to warm up and put them to sleep. So we had to give them an override to turn off the circadian rhythm in their offices, because everybody was getting tired at night. It was doing what it's supposed to do. It's telling them to go home and go to bed. But no grad student was doing that at 7 o'clock at night. So it actually became a very important part of the design process of the building, and determining which spaces they were going to actually activate that in, and then not, and then override it and not use that color tuning. So it was a good experiment for the design process as well.
Well, I think that's another thing that is really important to consider when you are a lighting controls designer. But at the same time, some things you can't predict, some things you can't pre-design, some things you have to
Yeah.
be at the ready to respond to later on. And I think that really points to this concept that I push, at least, which is that lighting control systems are living, breathing entities. They're not just static elements
Yes.
anymore. And so, having the capability of reprogramming those spaces was crucial to the success of the occupants' well-being in that
Yep.
space, because of the fact
Yep.
that they need to stay up late. And so I think there's another thing that is worth considering, which is the fact that, yeah, okay, you might have the right person in the room at the time, but that may change. And so,
Sure.
when you're designing every single space, you can take into consideration all of the parameters that you need, but you're still not going to predict everything.
Correct. And especially in commercial, we've been doing, since I moved to Core Controls, we do a lot of tenant fit outs.
Mhm.
And
And
they have spaces that are
just
designed
to
as conference room. Yeah,
hold on, Mark. Just for people who are unfamiliar with that term, do you mind defining what tenant fit out is?
sure. So basically, a TI or tenant improvement, tenant fit out is a commercial building that is basically an empty shell. And then they have a customer that comes in and takes over a floor or a section of floor, and they build out that space for their particular use, their offices, their conference rooms, open office space, whatever it might be. And we have to have a lighting control system that's flexible, that we can adjust to how those spaces are going to be put in. So in the case of when we design for that, we typically use a distributed lighting control system, so that the controls are in each space and not a centralized system that doesn't allow the flexibility of changes. And where I was going with that is that we've been doing these tenant fit outs, and we may, during the initial construction, they may have large conference rooms and some open office spaces. And within a year, for instance, the one facility that we've been working on for the last year or so, is that they've changed that, and they've had to change. They've taken conference rooms and split it into 2 offices, or they've split it into 4 huddle spaces, or and so you have to have the flexibility and the type of system that you can manipulate easily to make these changes. And that's why with we've really been working with our manufacturer to allow them to work with a system that is flexible, that we're not doing custom programming for every job that we do. It's more of a configuration. We sit down there with it. We've got a phone app. We configure the spaces rather than actually having to do custom programming. And that gives us the ability to quickly make changes and take that space and transform it from one thing, what it was originally designed to be, into something else, into a completely different space.
Well, and that's also something interesting, because we've recently had a couple of really in-depth discussions about Dolly and how Dolly is utilized. But it sounds as though, from that perspective, Dolly would actually be a heavier lift than a proprietary protocol system.
It can be. When I first started in the industry, I had a project that was Dolly, and it really comes down to how it's implemented. Back in the old days, you had a Dolly loop that could cover several classrooms or office spaces off of a single loop. And then to try and go back when we were doing fluorescent and add ballasts and things like that, you had to plug in a computer and do all of these things and jump through hoops and flashlights in different areas to try and group them and do all of that. What I like about the system that I'm working with right now, the Dolly controller is actually in the room. So it's a little small J-box controller. You mount it in the room. I can do up to 64 ballasts or drivers in that space, but I'm not leaving the space. It's been priced so that it's meant to be used on a room level basis, and that way it's much similar to working with individual load controllers. But I'm not having to, when I rework the space, I'm not having to actually rework all of my load wiring or my control wiring. I can still use the Dolly controllers and I now have a phone app that allows me to do all the grouping and set limits on drivers and regroup and all of that. So I think that Dolly has matured in how the front end works, which I think has made huge leaps and bounds. I spent the first 7 years of my career saying, don't ever put Dolly on a project. It's a nightmare. and it was based on one project that number one was poorly designed, and number two was installed incorrectly. And so now that I've gotten into, yeah, exactly. And so once I've gotten into the ability to actually look at it on a per space basis, that's really solved a lot of issues. And in fact, I've got a project right now in LA that we are doing Dolly track heads using a combination of Dolly and wireless Gasambi enabled track heads. And so we're taking those wireless track heads and bringing them in through our Crestron Dolly, and have the ability to pull the two systems together to give us individual track head control, and something that typically we would have done probably with DMX in the past. Now we're able to do it with Dolly and work it in with the rest of the lighting controls in the space. So it's actually, Dolly has really come a long ways in the last 5 years, in my opinion.
just to tear this down a little bit, because I want to make sure our listeners understand what you're talking about here, because there's a lot going on with this concept. It's not that your system is a Dolly system and that the entire building is just speaking raw Dolly through and through. What it is that you have your main backbone system, which is a proprietary protocol that's communicating between everything, and you have the Dolly controller per space if you have Dolly in those
Correct.
spaces. And so
Yep.
that's a very different design layout than what one would make the argument for how Europe does it. In Europe, you're not going
Right.
to have
Correct.
the proprietary backbone. You're just going to have Dolly coming out from a main controller, and that's going to be the only
Yep.
protocol really that's going around.
And we still have that ability to do that, but we're finding that we tend to do more hybrid systems where I may look at different spaces different ways. And I do the same, even if it's not Dolly, even if it's just standard 0 to 10 volt dimming. I may do distributed dimming in offices and common, or, conference rooms and things like that. But then I may use a centralized panel for large common spaces, exterior lighting loads, things like that. So I tend to, when we design, we look at the entire building and try to figure out what is going to be the number one, most economical way to do it, and the way that's going to be easier for the end user to maintain, and for the right from the installation process of how the project gets installed through the maintenance process. So we tend to try to do hybrids where it makes sense. And so, for instance, that project that I was talking about with the Dolly, that was a very specific project where we've got Dolly track heads for the exhibits, but for general spaces and corridor, well, for general spaces we've got centralized panels, and then for offices we've got smaller distributed systems, and they are all network. They are all required to be networked back to a main hub to meet Title 24 and demand response and things like that that are required out in California.
All right, I have two questions for you.
Sure.
So I'm interested in the Dolly track heads, and if there's the reason versus doing that over DMX, right? Advantages or reasons to do Dolly track heads versus DMX track heads, and then I kind of want to dive a little bit more into doing hybrid systems. I'm curious, are you driven to do hybrid systems because of the need of the space, right? Proprietary system A cannot fit the bill, and you're forced to do that to give the owner the experience that they want rather than shoving, proprietary A down their throats? Or is
Right.
it that you're sort of being driven that way because of the lighting designer? They chose this specific fixture, and this system won't talk to that. So we need to introduce this second system to talk to these fixtures. So I'm kind of curious how you tend to get into that hybrid system as well.
Well, so to answer your first question with the Dolly versus DMX, typically for track lighting, if you're doing DMX track heads or DMX controlled track heads, you have to have a special track that has a data bus installed into it, which is fine. And I've done many of those over the years, and it works fine. One of the issues that I have, especially in some of the track that has a side mounted data bus as opposed to the data bus being integral down in the bottom of the track, is that the data pins on the track heads, if they're removed in and out quite often, can get damaged, and you can have issues with signal. The reason that we went with the Dolly system or the Dolly track in this particular case was because the track heads were talking wirelessly through Kasambi back to a gateway. So we didn't have to have a special data track. Every track head is talking wirelessly back through a gateway and then into our Dolly gateway. So it allows us to have individual track control, but not have to use that data bus. We're communicating wirelessly back to those track heads. So that's kind of the decision that we made on that particular project. The one concern that I have anytime you do addressable track heads is understanding where those track heads are when you're trying to control them, because as they get moved around, people understand that the
Yep.
address follows the fixture, not the location. And so that's one
Yep.
of the things that can be a challenge, especially if you're trying to do a graphical interface to control the lighting controls, and then you've got a device that is addressed that can be moved around from space to space. In this particular case, it's a gallery, it's a museum, and so they're not going to be moving the track heads around as often as they are wanting the individual control of light level as the exhibits change. So that's the primary reason for having individually adjustable track heads in that kind of case. As far as deciding how we design a system, it can be any number of reasons. It could be because of the fixture, the fixture package that the lighting designers designed around. Maybe they have mostly phase dimming or two-wire dimming, forward phase, reverse phase dimming loads. Maybe it's mostly decorative and things like that. So it may be more cost effective to do a centralized dimming panel for two-wire loads, because most distributed controllers have some limitations as far as how much wattage they can carry and things like that when you're doing distributed controls. So sometimes phase dimming doesn't work out as well. Other reasons, it is because of how the space is being used and the type of protocol that's being used for those fixtures. We just finished an ice hockey arena out in the desert in Palm Springs. Go figure, you're building a desert where it's 120 degrees outside. But in that facility, we have distributed controls in the suites, and part of the reason for that is that for maintenance purposes, they wanted to be able to go up in the ceiling and be able to access the controllers if they needed to do maintenance to those systems. All of the sports lighting is all DMX controlled. So as part of our control system, we have all DMX controlling all of the individual sports lighting heads that are controlled by our system. And then we have centralized panels for the corridors, for the common spaces and corridors and exterior lighting. Because of the larger lighting loads, I needed a full 16 amps at 277 volts to be able to control those. And they were bringing them all back to electrical rooms in the different quadrants. So that was looking at each of the different space use types and determining what the best type of control was for each of those spaces. And so that's where we find most of our decision making on the design side when we're working with the engineers, architects, or lighting designers, is let's look at the building, let's look at how it's being utilized and the type of fixtures that are being utilized and what type of control we want to offer for those spaces, and then determine what type of system works best for that space. Maybe it can all be a centralized panel. Maybe it's going to be, for instance, auditoriums. Quite often you can do the entire auditorium now with DMX control, so that your stage lighting and your house lights and everything is on DMX, and you don't have to have a separate lighting control system for that space. So it really comes down to what the space use is and the type of fixtures that are most commonly going to be used in those spaces.
And I would say that that's a pretty common theme in a lot of what we've discussed with other people. Is really it boils down to what the intent of the space is going to be.
Yep.
A big open warehouse may still have some zones, but those zones are going to function very differently than an auditorium or than a sports arena. So, really you do need to kind of hammer down what the intent of the space is as best as you can. But one of the things that's interesting, you're bouncing back and forth between distributed and central controls, and I know a lot of people kind of get frustrated because they don't understand when to use one over the other. Excuse me. And so, curious if you have like a short list of criteria that you usually go through when deciding whether to do a centralized versus a distributed system.
I think that for the most part, most of the design work that we do is around a distributed system. I would say 90% of the projects that we do are now distributed. We rarely do centralized panels as much anymore. The areas that I would see that we would more often use centralized panels would be, for instance, hospitality, where you've got several decorative loads. I just find that and they don't have a lot of spaces to hide controllers. So when you're talking about a distributed system, you got some kind of a load controller that's usually in each space. Well, if you get into restaurants that have open ceilings that are painted black, you don't want to have all these white boxes all over the place with little flashing lights on them that are controllers. So in a case like that, you have to use a centralized control system, or at least I typically would use a centralized panel. When
Right.
I've
And
got, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, so basically, I think that that's a really good criteria there to compare the two, because of the fact that, there are times where a distributed system will be specified and the contractor will just shove all of the distributed stuff into the electrical room as though it's a centralized system. And then it's like, well, why didn't you just go with a centralized system at that point?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I had that happen on a project where we were using a wireless control system, and so that wireless system kind of uh, assumes that these controllers are going to be spread across the space, and they repeat the signal from controller to controller, so that you've got a full mesh network that's creating your control system. Contractor took all of those parts and put them back in the electrical room, and all of a sudden our keypads and our sensors, none of that stuff was talking to anyone because there's nothing to repeat the signal. And so at that point, why didn't we use a centralized panel if you're going to put them all back there? And that's that goes back to having conversations with the installing contractor. And when I get a project, once we've got a purchase order and we've sent out factory drawings and we've gotten approvals back, I'll go and sit with the contractor and go through these things with them and say, hey, listen, the system was designed this way because of this. If we need to change that, it's probably too late now because we've already gone through the approval process, but let's have this conversation. And
that's a really
that
good
goes
added
back to,
service as a rep, because
yeah,
a designer's not going to be able to do that most of the time.
Right.
But
it's a requirement on all of our projects. I mean, I've got contractors that say, "Oh no, we don't need you to come out." I said, "No, I'm sorry, I'm coming out just to go through the drawings," because the reality of it is in most of these projects, especially anything that's publicly bid, you have 3 different manufacturers that are approved to be bid on. What was designed or what's on the contract drawings may not be what's bought out in the end. And so therefore systems have, in the end, yes, they're all doing the same thing. They're turning the lights on, off, raising and lowering the light levels. That's what a lighting system does. How you get there can be very different in different systems. And so I've got a contractor right now that designed per the contract drawings, but didn't design per the factory submittal drawings. And the 2 systems are completely different. And quite honestly, the way that the system was designed wouldn't have worked based on the contract drawings anyway, because there were typicals mostly of product that's been discontinued. So it's very important as an agency. That's as a service oriented agency. That's one of the things that we pride ourselves on is really following that project as early on as we can get in, all the way through into the end, because we find that if we have that little pre-construction meeting, it saves so much time when we go to do the commissioning of the project and figuring out the sequence of operations and all of these things. It's keeping the project on your radar all the way through, and understanding that there are steps that if you follow these steps, when you get to the end of the project, you're going to have hopefully have a happy end user and a building that is functioning the way that it's supposed to.
Well, we're almost out of time here, but I want to kind of
Yep.
package all of this up, because it is a really fascinating thing, this whole process, and each agency kind of does their own workflow, their own approach to lighting controls design and implementation, and so it's really fun to hear all these different perspectives. But I mean, from your stance, as a lighting controls rep, you do a lot of the controls design work. You may not be the official lighting controls designer, but you may be you're pretty much doing the majority of the design work to support the intent of the project. And part of that really hinges on your ability to connect with the right end user. You've mentioned an end user you may speak with may not be the informative entity that you are looking for. They may tell you completely incorrect information, um, and you'll have to go back and redesign. But that's why it's critical to really try and identify the right people at early on in the design process to get the correct information, so that you can carry that intent through the rest of the project, because you are following it from beginning to end. And if you get pulled on late in the game, that's going to really put you behind the eight ball in the ability to guide the design process and provide a solid solution to what's going on. But irrelevant to that, the specification of the luminaires still creates a burden for you, because not all luminaires are created equal. Not all luminaires have the same protocols. And so you need to design around the fact that you may have dolly, phase dim, 0 to 10 in the same space. And so that's where part of coming up with a distributed system versus a centralized system really helps out, because then you can put a dolly controller, a 0 to 10 controller, and a phase dim controller, and ad hoc for each unique space. But not every single space is going to want to have those distributed system devices inside of them. And so having a centralized system may be a better choice, even if you're not going to have that ad hoc capability. You're not going to have that reconfigurable format for the space, because you have exposed ceilings, or you have really nice finished gyp ceilings that you don't want to mar with anything. And so figuring out the backbone of your system is still a critical element to the success of the project. And then not only figuring that out, but having that conversation with the contractors, having that conversation with the people who are installing it, so that they know, no, you can't just shove everything in the electrical room. You have to distribute this out. And I imagine that conversations that you have with them kind of reviews the criteria of identifying, okay, where can we mount this stuff? Where should we mount this stuff? So that it's not just, oh, okay, I'll just randomly throw stuff in the ceiling and we'll be good. There needs to be some kind of guidance with that. But also as it pertains to the fundamentals of lighting controls design, what you say is, it kind of agrees with what everybody else says, which is it really matters what you're doing in the space, who's using the space, how they're using the space. And you may end up having to adapt to that over time. It may not be the same occupants every single time, or it may be that the occupants' needs have changed. Or again, like with the tenant fit out, they may gut the space again and start over, and you need to have a system that can respond to that. And so all of these considerations are really critical to the success of a lighting controls design, layout, and implementation. And I think that's another argument to be made right now for why the sales reps are an ideally posed to be able to help guide the lighting controls process. Maybe again, not in an official capacity as the lighting controls designer in name, but they are essentially the shadow designer. They're there behind the scenes, making sure that everything is going to work in the end.
Yep. No, that's exactly right. It's having from a rep agent standpoint, having the different tools in the toolbox of different manufacturers, to being able to pull those together and provide the right solution for the project. That's the key for our agency anyway. I know that other agencies may have other reasons to put product out there, but because we are not owned by a conglomerate and we are a standalone company doing just lighting controls, we have the flexibility to work with anybody and on any type of project and provide the proper type of controls for that project.
Yeah, that's huge. And you really hammered home a few things that we've talked about a lot with people, which is, communication early and often, getting in front of the right people and having those conversations. And like Webster mentioned about having the sales reps on site, whether it's a third-party integrator or the sales rep, somebody has to be there to help kind of handhold the electrician. They're not, most of these guys are not control specialists, right? That's why we're there, right? That's not what they do. So someone needs to be there to make sure that they install the equipment properly, know how it goes together, that, you can't install a mesh system and put it all in the back and expect the switch at the front door to communicate, right? These are things
Correct.
you can't do. And you have to
Right.
be able to someone has to own that. And if there's multiple reps involved, that's where I will advocate for integrators. It's where it really helps to
Oh
have
yeah.
that third party. But if one rep is handling the whole line and taking care of it, that rep can absolutely serve as that integrator, right? And handle that project startup. It's just about having the right people to make sure that someone is there to help through the entire project and make sure the owner has a good experience. Because we've all had it happen, right? If a project goes south, then it provides a bad taste for the owner. Everybody looks bad. Nothing. It's people don't want to use the control
Nobody's
system.
happy.
They don't right. They don't care about what code says. They're going to get the building signed off and they're going to rip it out, or they're going to change it, or they're going to do this because they weren't happy with the way it went. Like everything we do, we all need to have learned from our mistakes, work together, and move forward as an entire industry. And that's really where we're at. And that's obviously right, just based on our conversation with you today. That's really where you're at. You're there from the beginning to have those conversations with people. Put yourself in front of them and say, no, we need to talk to these people. I understand, Mr. GC, that you don't want to bring the owner in, but we have to have this conversation. And here's 80,000 reasons why this has to happen.
Yeah.
So
Persistence
it's
matters.
great to hear all that. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, man, Mark, thank you so much. That was a great conversation. I hope our listeners got a lot out of it and got an understanding of why we keep pushing, having this communication and getting in front of all the right people. So thank you again for coming on today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
I just want to remind everybody, today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And is financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website for more episodes, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. We've got also a news feed and a merch store if you want to support the podcast. But until then, Mark, thank you so much for joining us, and everybody else, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.